Joni said to me, and he goes, she said to me, directly to me, if Jonathan tries to reach out, give him back Daystar.
3 weeks before she died, she had her makeup done, sat upright through 30 minutes of pain, and said, if Jonathan tries to reach out, give him back Daystar. Joni Lamb was dying. She knew it. And 3 weeks before she died, she called in a meeting. She had her makeup applied. She fixed her hair. She sat upright in her makeup chair through 30 minutes of conversation, despite the pain that made sitting upright at all an act of deliberate, effortful will. And she told Daystar's head board member something that the board has since declined to confirm, something the man she told has now publicly denied saying, and something that her son Jonathan, who was not in the room, who did not know his mother was near death, who did not find out she had died until 10 minutes before Daystar announced it on social media, learned about only secondhand, through a phone call he was never supposed to need. She said, if Jonathan tries to reach out, give him back Daystar. This video is based on verified public records, documented audio recordings, and investigative reporting by the Roy's Report. Anonymous source testimony included in the Roy's Report podcast has been independently corroborated by the publication as noted. Nothing in this video constitutes a legal conclusion. Tom Callender has denied making the statement attributed to him. All sources are linked in the description. Those words, reported by the Roy's Report in June 2026 and attributed to board member Tom Callender in a recorded interview with a source whose identity and account were independently verified by investigative journalist Julie Roys, represent the most significant documented moment in the succession crisis that has gripped Daystar television network since May 7th, 2026. They also represent, if the account is accurate, a stunning final reversal from a woman who had spent the last 2 years of her life systematically dismantling everything her son had worked toward. Stripping his title, cutting his salary by 40%, eliminating his company car, placing him on a performance improvement plan, and ultimately having him fired by a security guard in a bulletproof vest carrying a firearm on the 1-year anniversary of the board meeting where Jonathan had refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That Joni Lamb, in her final weeks, may have felt differently, that she may have recognized something had gone wrong, that the wall she had built between herself and her son was not what she wanted the last chapter of her life to look like, is, for those who have followed this story closely, not entirely surprising. What is surprising is what happened next. And what happened next is the lens through which the current state of Daystar television network must be understood. As of July 2026, Daystar has not announced a successor to Joni Lamb's presidency. No name has been put forward. No transition plan has been publicly disclosed. No board composition has been formally announced. The second largest Christian television network in the world, a network that by its own account reaches more than 2 billion homes globally, is operating in a leadership vacuum, and the people who are functionally running it have not been named to the positions that would give their authority any formal standing. What the public record does show is this. Rachel Lamb Brown, Joni and Marcus's youngest daughter, co-authored Daystar's July 2026 monthly leadership newsletter alongside her sister, Rebecca Lamb Weiss. Rachel's public social media identifies her role at Daystar as host, marketing director, and film producer. CFO Arnold Torres, whose compensation was reported by the Roy's Report at $300,000 annually in 2022, second only to Joni's own salary, which had jumped by 140% to more than $1 million following Marcus's death, continues in his role. Steve Wilhite, Daystar's senior vice president of affiliate relations, the man responsible for the satellite, streaming, and cable contracts that give Daystar its broadcast reach, also remains in place. These three have been described by multiple observers as the de facto operational leadership of the network, but none of them has been formally named to a leadership title. And the only person currently documented as holding board authority at Daystar, Tom Callender, has, by the account of multiple sources, become considerably less forthcoming since the weeks immediately following Joni's death. To understand why Callender's role matters so much, you need to understand what he has actually been at Daystar. He is an employment attorney. His professional profile describes him as a skilled employment attorney and strategic business partner. He was the board member who, at the August 2023 Daystar board meeting, responded to Jonathan Lamb's objection to the $103,000 honeymoon being charged to a ministry credit card by simply declaring that Daystar would gift the honeymoon to Joni. He was the board member who told Jonathan at the November 2023 board meeting, audio of which is publicly archived at the Roy's Report, that refusing to sign the NDA meant removing yourself from the board and from your vice president position. And he was the board member who, according to the anonymous source's account in the Roy's Report's June 2026 podcast, confirmed to her directly and emotionally, weeping on the phone, that Joni had told him 3 weeks before her death to give Jonathan back Daystar if he reached out. The source who shared this account with the Roy's report is identified only as anonymous at her own request for fear of professional repercussions to a family member. Julie Roys confirmed the woman's identity independently. She also confirmed the account through a separate channel. After the woman's phone call with Tom Callender, Callender reached out to Jonathan himself. The two had their first phone call in a long time. Callender asked Jonathan if he would be willing to meet with his sisters. Jonathan said yes, apparently telling Callender that he was willing to apologize for anything he had done that caused harm, that the estrangement had gone further than he intended, that he wanted reconciliation. Susie Lamb, on a subsequent call, said Callender was warm and almost crying with relief. He told her this had been weighing on him enormously, that the stress of the family's division had been almost unbearable to carry. Then he spoke with Rachel and Rebecca. The anonymous source described receiving a call back from Callender approximately 2 hours after their initial conversation. He told her the girls were not ready, that they would get together after the funeral, but not before. The source had hoped to orchestrate a meeting before the service, believing the timing was important. Callender said he could not make that happen. The funeral was held on May 18, 2026. Jonathan and Susie Lamb attended. They were seated far from the family section. They were barred from the stage. And Pastor Gentazen Franklin, Marcus Lamb's close friend, the man who eulogized him in 2021, used his sermon at Joni's memorial service to indirectly rebuke Jonathan and Susie, shaming critics of the ministry from the pulpit of a grief service. The Roy's report characterized Franklin's sermon in a subsequent podcast episode titled Daystar's Spiritually Abusive Farewell to Joni Lamb. The slideshow that ran during the service contained no photographs of Jonathan or Susie. They had been removed entirely from the visual record of their own family's public farewell. The slideshow was not an oversight. There is no accidental version of removing your son and his wife from the photos shown at your own mother's memorial service. That is a decision, and it was made by someone, or more likely by several people, who still had operational control of what happened at that service, and who chose to use the final public expression of Joni Lamb's life to send a message to anyone watching about who belonged inside the frame of this family and who did not. 2 days after the funeral, on May 20th, 2026, Tom Callender sent a text message to the anonymous source. Tom Callender text, May 20th, 2026. Please correct your statement immediately that you spoke to the head of the board and that I said anything to you about what Joni's last wishes were. I did not share any such statement with you. Source, The Roy's report. Joni's stunning request, give Daystar to Jonathan if he reconciles. June 2026. He had, by the account of the source and by the separate corroboration of Jonathan's own call with him, a call Callender himself initiated, said exactly that. The reversal was complete. The man who had wept on the phone and said the family's estrangement had been almost unbearable to carry was now, 48 hours after the funeral, denying the entire conversation had taken place. Jonathan Lamb's public statement, in response to learning what his mother had reportedly said, is worth allowing to speak for itself, because it is measured and dignified in a way that stands in marked contrast to how he has been treated throughout this entire saga. He said, and this is his statement in full as given to and published by the Roy's report. Learning that my mother's dying wish was for me to return to leadership at Daystar is both healing and deeply confirming. The estrangement between us was one of the most painful seasons of my life, and knowing that her heart moved toward restoration in her final days brings me a peace I did not expect to feel so soon. Her wish aligns with what my father communicated to our family and the board in his succession plan. Both of my parents, in their final days, pointed in the same direction. Most importantly, it is a calling God planted in me when I was a child. This was never about ambition or title. It is about faithfulness to a calling my parents recognized and that I have never walked away from, even in the hardest moments. That statement has not been publicly responded to by Daystar, by Rachel Lamb Brown, by Tom Callender, or by Arnold Torres. The network has made no public statement about the succession question. None. There is one additional element of the documented record that deserves to be named clearly, because it bears directly on the question of who was surrounding Joni Lamb in her final days and what those final days actually looked like. According to the anonymous source, Joni Lamb did not die in Bedford, Texas, as Daystar's official announcement stated. She died at a facility called the Oasis of Hope, a clinic in Tijuana, Mexico, that offers alternative cancer treatments not approved for use in the United States. She was taken there on a Monday. She died on a Thursday. And her daughters, according to the source, were on Daystar's air that same morning, hosting their programming, laughing and talking without knowing their mother was dying that day. The source also told Julie Roys that she had sent Joni a text message during that final period saying she had heard Joni was very ill and asking her to call. The text she received back was brief and cold and did not sound like Joni. The source believes that Doug Weiss had control of Joni's phone by that point. Roys, in her own editorial comment, was careful to note that this is not established, that it may simply have been that Joni was too ill to respond personally, but that the thought of someone in the final days of their life being in Mexico, apparently without their adult children knowing, apparently unable to receive a text on her own phone, is an incredibly sad picture, whatever the explanation ultimately turns out to be. That is not a conclusion. It is an observation. And it is the kind of observation that the people currently running Daystar television network are in a position to address, clarify, or correct if they choose to. So far, they have not chosen to. Now step back from the specific details of this final sequence and look at what the governance question actually means for the network going forward. Daystar is classified by the IRS as a church, which exempts it from filing the standard Form 990 tax returns that all other nonprofits of its size are legally required to submit. This means that unlike virtually every other large nonprofit organization in the United States, Daystar has no legal obligation to publicly disclose its board composition, its executive compensation, or the financial decisions being made in the wake of its founder's death. The last time Daystar's finances were documented in any detail, through internal documents obtained by the Roys Report, the network's highest paid employee was Joni Lamb, at more than $1 million annually, and its board consisted of Joni, Jonathan, and Tom Callender, with Arnold Torres added mid-meeting during the November 2023 session that ended with Jonathan being told to sign a non-disclosure agreement or lose his position. That board, in its documented composition, no longer exists in the form it did when those three people held their seats. Joni is dead. Jonathan has been fired. Whether Callender remains in his board role, whether Torres remains in his, whether new board members have been added, and who has the legal authority to make the decisions currently being made about the network's programming, finances, and editorial direction, none of that has been disclosed. None of it is required to be disclosed. And none of it will be disclosed unless Daystar chooses to volunteer it, or unless a legal proceeding compels it. That is not a hypothetical accountability gap. That is a documented institutional structure in which a major Christian broadcasting organization with a claimed global reach of 2 billion homes can change leadership, alter its governance, reallocate its finances, and make decisions about a multi-hundred-million-dollar institution without telling anyone outside its walls anything about how those decisions are being made or who is making them. The donors who fund that institution through their financial gifts, the viewers who trust it with their spiritual attention, and the ministry partners who have continued their broadcast relationships with Daystar, despite everything that has been documented over the past 2 years. All of them are in a position of extending trust to a governance structure that has chosen not to identify itself publicly. The anonymous source interviewed by the Roys Report put it plainly when she reflected on how she had come to be involved in this situation at all. She said that when she heard Joni had died and the funeral had not yet occurred, she felt compelled to try to help bring the family together before the body of Christ had to witness the spectacle of a divided family at the memorial of a woman who had spent decades on Christian television promoting family values and biblical unity. She said she had been sexually abused as a child. She said she knew what it felt like to survive something that an institution asked you to stay silent about. And she said she could not watch what was happening to Jonathan and Susie without trying to do something. Her attempt, the phone calls, the tears, the prayer, the 2-hour window, the genuine effort to get people who had hurt each other into the same room before it was too late, ended with a text message on May 20th telling her that none of it had happened. Here is where things stand. Joanie Lamb is gone. Marcus Lamb is gone. The man both founders identified, at different points and in different ways, as their intended successor has no title, no role, and no seat at a table that neither of them is alive to offer him. The board member, who reportedly wept at the prospect of reconciliation, sent a text 2 days after the funeral denying the conversation had occurred. The network is being operated by people whose positions have not been formally announced and whose board authority has not been publicly disclosed. And the ministry continues to broadcast, continues to ask viewers for their financial support, and continues to present itself to a global audience as a God-honoring institution built on transparency and biblical fidelity. The documents are public. The podcast recordings are archived. The board meeting audio is time-stamped. Jonathan Lamb's statement is on the record. The only people who can answer the question of whether Daystar will honor what both of its founders reportedly wanted, and what the board member who still holds authority over the institution reportedly confirmed to a witness 3 weeks before Joni died, are the people currently holding the keys. And so far, they have said nothing. Everything cited in this video is linked in the description. The Roy's report, the board meeting audio, the anonymous source interview, it is all there, in full, for you to evaluate yourself. Read the primary sources, listen to the recordings. Draw your own conclusions from the primary evidence, because the institutions that are most resistant to accountability are the ones that depend most on your willingness to take their word for it. Subscribe to stay with this story. There is more to come. Until next time, stay rooted, stay real, stay in the Word. God bless.